So Microsoft is getting some blunt advice from Vulcan Capital, the investment firm founded by Paul Allen, Microsoft's co-founder. The firm says Microsoft's next CEO should consider spinning off the company's consumer businesses. But is this the best move for Microsoft?
Activist investors, right? Well, joining us now, Brent Thill, UBS Managing Director and Senior Analyst, and Todd Lowenstein, Highmark Capital Management Director and Value Equity Portfolio Manager. Highmark Capital owns 3.3 million shares. Okay, Brent, right off the bat, are they on to something? Are they correct over at Vulcan in pushing to spin off the consumer business at Mr. Softy?
I have a lot of respect for Vulcan. I don't agree with spinning off the entire consumer business. I think that's very difficult to do. I think you could spin off elements of the consumer business, which would be Xbox, but separating the consumer and enterprise software business is very difficult task to do. And I think when you look at the prosumer segment of the market, my kids are growing up with technology, and they're going to bring that into the workplace. And so I think the last thing Microsoft wants is for Apple to get a foothold into the enterprise because they're growing up with Apple products.
Okay.
So I don't think that it's an easy split right down the middle.
Okay, that's the analyst side. Todd, you're the investor side. You've got a big chunk of Microsoft. Would you get excited to see something like that happen?
I think it's an interesting proposition. The impetus behind this really is to shed the spotlight on the business enterprise side of the business. This is the crown jewel of Microsoft. When you look under the hood, the value really resides in the enterprise business. It's 80% of the profitability, and it should garner 80% of the valuation. Unfortunately, today it doesn't. It's being obscured by a consumer business that oftentimes is break-even or money-losing. And so, as a result, Microsoft trades at a lower multiple than it should intrinsically, lower than the market, lower than its characteristics as a business and its growth profile. So I think even if this transaction were not to occur, I think this helps move the conversation forward and maybe change hearts and minds.
Todd, I've got to make the obvious, pun here. Live long and prosper is what Vulcan is trying to do with Microsoft. But we see this not only playing with giant companies like Microsoft. You have Dan Loeb telling Sony to get their act together and maybe split some things apart. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about, for instance, like the Xbox, breaking that off. Can you have a smaller, stronger Microsoft, an independent Xbox, or whatever you want to call it? I know that they were the dominant player for a couple of years, but now Sony actually beat them in the last quarter. So what good would come of that other than short-term gain for an investor?
I echo the sentiments of your guest earlier. It's going to be increasingly difficult to separate the two, especially after double downing with and making a big bet on Nokia. But the Xbox business is a viable business. It is a interesting business. It's about $8 billion in revenue, low to mid-high single-digit profits, and a huge installed base. They sold 80 million units. They sold 10 million last year, I believe. They have a huge online community. This is a viable business, and what makes it interesting for the long term is not just the gaming, but to use this as a console or a set-top box for multimedia, for internet access, for social networking, gaming, as well as other activities.
And there's a new one coming out.
This is their entry into the household.
Right. They've got the new one coming out mid-November. Brent, this stock has done just fine with keeping its consumer business under its wing. It's up 33% year to date. We just find it fascinating that Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft, is the guy whose company Vulcan is behind all of this. But in the end, is it possible, or do you think that the new CEO, because we know Steve Ballmer is leaving, the new CEO would consider just spinning off what you talk about, and that is the Xbox business?
They could. I think the conversation, as your guest said, it's relevant to really look at the commercial business. The Xbox business isn't going to move the needle for shareholders at Microsoft right now, right? The 60% plus of their business is commercial. It's highly recurring. It grew double digits last quarter. It's going to grow double digits again per their forecast for Q2. So we think that's probably the most important exercise here is that if you look at all the activists that have gotten in recently, they're looking at this going, this is a totally undiscovered gem on the commercial side. Who cares about the other side? At 8 billion out of 80 plus billion, it's very, very small. So what we've been positive on the stock because we look at that commercial business. It's highly sticky, multi-year agreements that renew. It's not going away. So I think this. Yes.
I want to ask you a quick question. Alan Mullally is on Liz's program all the time. He's a friend of Fox Business. He is well respected for what he did at Boeing as well as at Ford. Could he do the same thing that he did for Ford at Microsoft, or would he be in over his head?
I think he would be perfect. Number one, he was a 757 engineer on the cockpit. He ran Boeing. He got to Ford, took it from basically it was bankruptcy, breathed fresh air into that company, spun off, assets that weren't doing well to Tata. We think he'd be, he's got every asset, that would make, I think, a great leader.
Todd, do you agree with Brent?
I think he's got huge positives. I think those were just delineated. The one thing he lacks is being a proven technologist and having strength in technology. A record for change and a change agent would be very important too. He could be an interesting choice. I think initially there might be some disappointment not being from the tech ecosystem, but he is clearly a good manager and has a proven track record.
Brent Thill and Todd Lowenstein, we're watching what happens at Microsoft, no doubt, but stock up 33% year to date. It's doing pretty well. Thank you so much. It was